This is the most common question I get when I meet you in person. Last week, I was at this really cool conference, and it was the first time the Columbia Journalism Department and Columbia Psychiatry combined forces to talk about mental health in journalism. Our panel was about innovation in the world of journalism and mental health, and we got a question that always comes up whenever I do a live talk.
This spring, I'm applying to medical school, so I've been thinking a lot about my personal statement. As some of the clinicians here have disclosed their own struggles, you're also all very accomplished. And, was waiting until that point a conscious decision? And if you were still a trainee, would you feel differently than you do now?
That question, when and how do I talk about my mental illness? What are the consequences of it? How do I do it? It always comes up. And here's how we answered it.
I've read several personal statements, and I know one I edited and wrote a letter of recommendation for, and he talked about his experience being having bipolar disorder and how being hospitalized and being in treatment actually empowered him to want to be a physician and change the system after experiencing things. So I feel like if you phrase it in a way that, because we want to know about you, right? When you're applying to medical school, we want to know what's influenced you. And I think that it's the stigma about it being perceived negatively is going away. It is a risk. But if you're able to phrase it in a way like, this is me, I'm open about it, and this is going to help me become a better physician, I think it can be very successful. Now, would I have done it then? I mean, I was ages ago when nobody really talked about, no physicians really talked about it. I probably wouldn't have. But now that more people are open, it's more in the media about physicians dying from suicide more than any other profession. I think now is a way more appropriate time.
A quick thing I want to encourage everyone in this room to remember is we tell stories about our scars, not our wounds. And that's something I encourage a lot of people to think about is when you're ready to tell a story, when you have context, when you have perspective, then tell your story. If you're in the middle of a crisis, if you're still struggling with the thing you want to tell a story about, maybe it's better time to wait a little bit. I told a story, or I wrote a piece about the experience I had losing my brother to suicide. And I wrote that when I was a postdoctoral fellow. How intentional was that? It wasn't intentional in terms of I'm waiting until I'm almost done with training, but it was about 5 years after I lost my brother, which is on average how long it takes people who had a suicide-related loss to talk about it. If I was a trainee now, the world is very different. NPR had a great series about a doctor who disclosed their, or a medical student who disclosed their depression in medical school. So I would look that one up to help you to get a little context on here. I think the world has completely changed in terms of how we're talking about mental health, and I would probably be more open to talking about those kind of things if I was a trainee now.
By the way, there's two big mental health Instagrammers there on that panel, Dr. Vanipod and Dr. Ramsey. You should check them out. They do awesome mental health content on Instagram. Go check them out, follow them. They do good stuff. I want to talk to you more about that question and give you a little bit more behind the scenes of how I think about that question and how I support my patients in thinking about that question. So there's 4 ways I want you to think about how to talk about your mental illness with someone else and when to do it. So number 1, if you're struggling right now, find someone you trust and share with them what you're going through. This could be a friend, it could be a teacher, a parent, an uncle, a coach, it could be your doctor, just someone that you trust, and share with them what's happening to you. They'll help you to figure out what to do, how to get help, and how to feel better. They might not know what exactly to do right now in this moment, but they can at least help you to think through and hopefully get you connected with someone who can help you to start feeling better. Number 2, if your mental illness is getting in the way of your school or your work, talk to someone who's in a position to help you out. Now, if you're in school, that might mean a counselor at school or talking to your doctor or your therapist about getting accommodations to help you to get through the school day, to take tests in an environment that's best for you, get the appropriate accommodations you need to have the fair shot at school. Same thing at work. So maybe you might want to talk to someone in HR, human resources, or maybe you want to talk to employee assistantship. There's usually, in larger organizations, there's usually someone you can go to and you can share what's going on. Or if you need to talk to someone about making it to your weekly therapy sessions and making sure you have time in your day to do that, HR might be the right place to go. If you're in a very small organization, that probably means you have to talk to your boss about this. And doing that proactively early on, whether it's school or work, that's the thing to do. It's a lot harder to try to get support when a crisis happens. It can definitely happen, but if it's like, for example, if you know you need certain academic accommodations and you've gone the whole school year and now it's finals and now you're bringing it up, even though you've known the whole time, teachers are going to be a little bit less supportive of that or a little bit less understanding. So definitely talk to people at school or at work before you need that help. Number 3 is dating. Now, I haven't been in the dating scene for a very long time. I've been in a very long distance relationship. So right here, I have to say that some of the nuances of dating now, of swiping and dating and apps is kind of like a little bit, goes a little bit above my head. That being said, I work with a lot of people who are trying to figure this stuff out. And one thing I want you to remember is while mental illness might be one part of your story, it is not your whole story. If you're just casually dating, maybe it's not a big deal. But if it's someone you're interested in for the long term, then it's best to bring it up as soon as you feel comfortable bringing it up. It's not something you want to push back on. It's not something you want to hide or dance around too much. It's something you want to bring up earlier rather than later. It always goes better when you bring it up before, especially before if some kind of crisis happens later or if you're really struggling later. That might be difficult for the person to understand what's going on. It can go much better if you bring it up sooner rather than later. Number 4, how to talk about mental illness publicly. This is where I often get the question, and sometimes it's a question related to applying to school, or I'm making a vlog, or I'm writing an article, or I'm a journalist and I want to, should I bring it up to a source, or should I bring it up in the newsroom? And there's so many ways in which we wonder whether, or there's so many ways in which we question whether or not we should share mental illness with a larger group of people. So the best advice I have for you is to remember that
We tell stories about our scars, not our wounds.
what that practically means is when you can talk about it and still relatively stay in this moment, connected to the other person without getting overwhelmed, that's a good sign that this is something you might be ready to share with a larger group of people. And if and when you're going to do that, I'd really recommend that you start with a small group of people, or start with one person or maybe a small group of people before you bring it up to a larger group, or before you kind of weave it into some kind of performance or storytelling event or something like that. And even when you do that, remember it is normal. Like a scar, sometimes when you hit that scar, it might still hurt. Similarly, when you share your story in a public environment, it might bring up some of those feelings, and that's normal. It's even normal if you share publicly to have difficulty sleeping after you've kind of shared it. All that stuff is kind of normal, but wait until it does feel more like a scar, not a wound. Have you ever shared your experience with mental illness with someone else, in a professional or in a personal or in a public setting? How did it go and what helped you? Let me know in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. If you want more psychology and mental health content, be sure to subscribe to this channel. And if you want to help me make more videos and get some behind the scenes stuff in return, be sure to check out my Patreon.